London, May 19th, 1536. A sombre sky loomed over the Tower of London. In the inner courtyard, a light-coloured wooden scaffold, uniquely low to accommodate a foreign executioner and his sword, had been erected overnight. A crowd began to gather, whispers spreading. Today a queen will be executed, the first in England's history. Anne Boleyn, the woman who shattered ties with Rome and revolutionized the kingdom, was about to meet her destiny. Within her small chamber, her prison for the past 18 days, Anne awakened to her final day. At 35, she retained the elegance that had once captivated England's most powerful king. Her loyal ladies-in-waiting helped her dress. Anne had carefully chosen a dark grey mantle lined with fur over a crimson bodice, colours that would conceal blood, a choice both practical and dignified. "I hear the executioner is very good," she remarked, touching her throat gracefully. "I have a little neck." This comment, recorded by witnesses, revealed not only courage, but a dark irony in the face of the inevitable. How did Anne Boleyn come to this terrible end? The daughter of Thomas Boleyn, an ambitious diplomat, and Elizabeth Howard of noble lineage, Anne spent part of her youth in the sophisticated French court. There she absorbed the Renaissance culture and refinement that would later set her apart. Upon her return to England around 1521, she wasn't considered a great beauty. With olive skin, black hair and dark eyes, she diverged from the Renaissance ideal of pale complexion and blonde hair. Yet she possessed something more valuable: a sharp intelligence, knowledge of languages and arts, and a magnetic presence that drew everyone to her. When Henry VIII, whose marriage to Catherine of Aragon had failed to produce the longed-for male heir, turned his eyes to Anne, she refused to follow in the footsteps of her sister Mary Boleyn, who had already been the king's mistress. "I will not be your concubine," she reportedly told the monarch. "If you want my heart and body, you must give me a crown." It was a risky gamble, but one that would forever change English history. For years, from 1527 to 1533, Henry pursued Anne with an obsession that reshaped the kingdom. To marry her, he broke with the Catholic Church, declared himself supreme head of the new Church of England, faced opposition from the Pope and Emperor Charles V, and revolutionized his country's religious structure. In January 1533, Anne and Henry secretly married while she was already pregnant. In September, to the king's great disappointment, Anne gave birth to a girl, the future Queen Elizabeth I. Back to May 19th, 1536. At 9 a.m, Anne received the cruel news that her execution had been postponed until noon. She had already prepared herself psychologically for the end, and these additional hours were agonizing. She spent them in prayer, taking communion, and repeatedly saying, "Lord, have mercy on me." At one point, she swore upon the sacred host that she had never betrayed the king, stating, "For my salvation, I am free of the things for which I was condemned." At noon, the drums began to sound. Anne bid farewell to her ladies, giving each a small gift as a memento: a prayer book, a handkerchief, a piece of jewellery. "Remember me and how I end," she asked them, before being led to the scaffold. The crowd gathered to witness the execution was smaller than expected, about 1,000 people. There was a strange, almost respectful atmosphere. Most of those present removed their hats when Anne appeared, dressed in grey and crimson, walking with the dignity that had always characterized her. On the scaffold, Anne was granted permission to make a final speech. Her words were carefully chosen. "Good Christians, I come here to die according to the law, and therefore I will speak nothing against it. I am come hither to accuse no man, nor to speak anything of that whereof I am accused. I pray God save the king, and send him long to reign over you, for a gentler nor a more merciful prince was there never, and to me he was ever a good, a gentle and sovereign lord." These words reveal an extraordinary woman. Even facing an unjust death, Anne did not proclaim her innocence nor attack her enemies. It was a masterful political move. By presenting herself as a loyal subject to the end, she preserved the dignity of the crown and indirectly protected the future of her daughter Elizabeth. After her speech, Anne removed her mantle and cap, handing them to her ladies. One of her last gestures was to give a purse of gold coins to the executioner, payment for a job well done. She then knelt on the scaffold, noticing there was no block to rest her head on, as in executions with an axe. Beheadings with a sword required the condemned to remain kneeling upright. One of her ladies tied a blindfold over her eyes. Anne continued to move her lips in prayer. "Jesus, receive my soul. O Lord God, have pity on my soul." The executioner, following French tradition, employed a merciful trick to distract Anne. "Where is my sword?" he asked aloud, though he had already silently positioned the weapon. When Anne turned her head slightly toward the voice, the executioner delivered the blow with brutal precision. The blade cut through the slender neck, separating the head from the body in a single motion. There was a momentary silence, followed by a collective sigh from the crowd. The executioner picked up the head by the hair and raised it, proclaiming, "So perish the king's enemies." But there was no customary roar of approval. Instead, only an uneasy murmur travelled through those present. At that moment, the thunder of cannon resounded through the tower, echoing across the Thames. It was the signal for Henry VIII, waiting at his Whitehall palace, that he was free to marry again. The next day, he became formally engaged to Jane Seymour. 10 days later, they were married. Anne's body was collected by her ladies, a brutal peculiarity. No proper coffin had been provided for the former queen. Improvising, the guards found an empty arrow chest, where Anne's body, with her head placed beside the trunk, was carried to the chapel of St. Peter ad Vincula within the tower itself. There, under the stone floor, without tombstone or marking, Anne was hastily buried in an anonymous grave. Henry VIII ordered that all portraits of Anne be destroyed, her emblems removed from palaces, and her name struck from official records. This damnatio memoriae, the condemnation of memory, was so effective that to this day no authenticated contemporary portrait of Anne Boleyn exists. However, if Henry intended to completely erase Anne's influence, he failed spectacularly. 23 years after her execution, her daughter Elizabeth ascended to the English throne. Elizabeth I would rule England for 45 years in a reign considered a golden age. The daughter surpassed the father in almost every aspect, and her greatest legacy was the stability that Henry had so desperately sought. In 1876, during a restoration of the chapel of St. Peter ad Vincula, bones were discovered in the place where Anne was believed to have been buried. Among them, a female skeleton with delicate bone structure and a small skull was identified as likely being Anne's. These remains were reburied with more dignity. Today, the site of Anne's execution is marked by a simple glass slab on the Tower of London's lawn. Each year, on the anniversary of her death, roses are laid there by admirers. For many, Anne Boleyn represents not just a tragic figure, but a symbol of historical injustice and the price that powerful women frequently paid. The final irony is that her triumph came through the daughter whom Henry considered a disappointment. Elizabeth I, upon assuming the throne, deliberately cultivated characteristics of her mother, even adopting the white falcon emblem of the Boleyns. Learning from her mother's fate, Elizabeth never married, declaring herself married to England. The Virgin Queen built her successful reign upon the ashes of her mother's sacrifice, a sacrifice that began on that grey May morning in 1536, when a queen walked with dignity to her death.